Have you taken a little time to explore some of the questions that we put forward in our last meeting, in the first episode of this series of DNA? Have you or have you not? Have you considered a little bit of those questions? 3 basic questions based on a premise that we established in Luke chapter 15 about the Good Shepherd, right? And he leaves the 99 and he goes after the one, and the one becomes the priority for him. Have you considered those 3 basic questions on an individual level, but also on a further and deeper level, a layer of collectivity? Have you considered those questions? Do you remember what was question number 1? Who do we attract? Remember that? Who do I attract as a human being? Am I the kind of person Jesus was, as described throughout the Gospels? The one who attracted the broken ones? Or is my self-righteous attitude and sentiment, as expressed in my words, just breaking people even more? So, who do I attract? And who do we collectively attract? But not only that, the second question was, who do we prioritize in our lives? Who am I prioritizing in my life? And then the last one was, who do we celebrate? What kind of attitude, what kind of reaction, what kind of reality do we celebrate as God's people here in this community? And following up with our series, we are now on chapter 2 of our series, and the title that I chose for chapter 2 is actually something that is very mindful and speaks to our hearts here at the Waynesboro Seventh-day Adventist Church in Virginia. Living the love of Jesus. And today, we ended up last time in part 1 trying to figure out how can we create that same mindset that Jesus had in order for us to operate within the framework that he did. How can we actually live the love of Jesus right here and right now in the 21st century, operating within those same principles? Obviously, you have certainly heard this story. You might even be living it right now, okay? You were raised in the church. Your parents, your grandparents, they were pioneers. They helped, bring the church together. Maybe not here, but somewhere else, and you have been you were raised in a Christian school. Everything all good, all awesome, all good, no problem whatsoever. When you yourself graduated from college, you wanted to replicate that same model of living within those parameters of the love of Jesus in your own family. But then, in the last 2, 3, 4 years, you started seeing something different happening within the church. And you started listening to messages that talked about too much of anger issues, and then this person from this story was sitting one day, and he had heard a sermon on one of those hot topics, those hot potatoes, and the sermon was really angry and misleading and did horrible, terribly misleading applications of the Bible. And then all of a sudden, as they were going out of the place of worship of their church, his daughter looked at him and asked a completely unrelated question. But it hit him like the perfect storm. That was the question. Daddy, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? What do we come by? Why do we practice what we're practicing? Why are we here? You might have heard about this phenomenon. It's a recent one. It's a Christian phenomenon called deconstruction. No, it's not about church building renovations, but it's about a post-church phenomenon. The Gospel Coalition Ministry website, a conservative Christian initiative that's led by theologians like Tim Keller and Don Carson, it has been sharing articles on this deconstruction of Christianity that we're witnessing it firsthand right now, a deconstruction of Christianity. It's just one of the symptoms of the post-structuralist moment that we're living in, what Bauman would call a fluidity that characterizes our times. Deconstruction is about people who understand their institutionalized faith community no longer represent their values and their practices. It doesn't make sense anymore for them. Daddy, why are we here? Why do we come here? Why do we insist on coming? Most times, the process of deconstruction is triggered by a deep pain that's inflicted by church-related abuse and manipulation. In one of those articles, TGC asked the basic question, so what is this phenomenon that we're seeing all around? I don't attend an institutionalized church, a denominational church. I attend a non-denominational church. Have you heard about this? Is it happening around? What's going on? The institutionalized religion might not be living by its own standards. Deconstruction is the process of systematically desiccating or dissecating and often rejecting the beliefs you grew up with. America grew up Christian, and we have firmly entered a post-Christian era in this country. Some of the ones who go through this deconstruction of their beliefs, usually triggered by pain, manipulative attitude, misleading, partial approach of God's principle and truth, just to keep people quiet, manipulating their minds. Some that go through that deconstruction, they remain there. But others experience a reconstruction. But the type of faith that they end up embracing almost never resembles that Christianity that they formerly knew. Let me tell you something. We've become way too politicized. Every single discussion of every single topic. Sure, the path towards unbelief is nothing new. This deconstruction is not a real new phenomena. Just as abusive and manipulative leadership isn't new as well. People that use the facade of religion to try to input their own ideologies on the people. This is not new. Jesus warned us against that. As did Paul and Peter, James, Judas. The early church had to deal with deconstruction. The early church had to deal very early on in their history with irrelevancy. And here's the question. How did they react to the challenge? How did they react to that deconstruction? Well, they simply, intentionally lived the love of Jesus. Nice, right? Simple answer. What do you mean by that? Grab your Bibles. Romans. The book of Romans will be the theme of a subsequent series that we're going to be studying after DNA. The book of Romans is the only book in the Bible that is about systematic theology. It's the only book theologically organized systematically in the Bible. The Apostle Paul is laying out at our feet there. He is just exposing and trying to translate into clear words a thesis on righteousness by faith. This is his thesis. And if you had the responsibility and the privilege of going through the painful and torturous process of writing down a thesis, you know what I'm talking about. So this is his thesis. And the abstract of that thesis is what we're going to read right now. Obviously, it's not going to be exhaustive. We cannot go through the layers of exegesis of this passage, but I want to point out what living the love of Jesus really means in the abstract of this Paul's thesis, okay? Romans chapter 1. We're going to read verses 16 and 17. Are you ready? Romans chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. I am not ashamed, for I am not ashamed. Stop right there. If you are familiar with biblical language and with biblical motives, with biblical themes, immediately as you read about shame, your mind goes to creation and the fall narrative. This is what Paul is telling and framing the concept that he's going to expose right here, okay? I am not ashamed. So there is no shame, and the opposite of shame, God's process and plan for us to get back into full communion with him, where there is no shame. Remember, the first emotion that happened, that Adam felt, that Eve felt right after the fall was, I was ashamed, and I hid. I became afraid because I was ashamed, and I hid. So there's a connection thematically to the origin, the fall. And now, how God is working out the process of restoration. Very good. So, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. So much that we could and will in the future explore of this here, this simple sentence. But here's the emphasis for today. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes. Jew, Greek, everyone. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the power of God. Do you understand that? Do I understand that? Do I understand what it means for us to explore that the power of God is perfectly exemplified in the gospel story? What do I mean? What am I trying to say here? While Jesus was born, from the godly position, everlasting God, becoming a creature, incarnation to happen. This is God's power. This is God's power. Look what he did. And usually for us, this is what happens in our world, okay? And I've been there, okay? I've been out there. I've dealt with power. A lot of it. Here's what happens. We're all about money or power. We want things to go our way. We like to be in a position of power because of our selfishness and our pride. We like to have that kind of thing in our hands. And when we look at God, we see that his power is about service. It's not for himself. That's why the gospel is the power of God. So incarnation to happen means God is emptying himself to serve you. That is his power. Throughout his life, in denial and sacrifice, and then going up to the cross, while he's there at the cross, and listen to this, while he's there at the cross, and the enemy points up to him and says, where is your power? This is how God answers. Here is my power. I lay down my life for my enemies. I give my life for you. This is God's power. God's power is not about him. It's about service. Can you see how the gospel of Jesus Christ is the revelation of God's power? Because this is who he is. God at the cross is who God is. This is what his power is for. Restoration. Transformation. The gospel is the power of God in action. While God was exposed to attacks and accusations before the entire created universe about his character, at the cross, Jesus demonstrated how God's power operates within parameters of perfect justice and mercy. The power of God lays within the combination, the perfect balance between justice and mercy. Justice because sin at the cross wasn't simply excused or rationalized. Sin was sin. And sin's ugly face of violence and abuse was completely exposed. That's justice. At the cross, we see our worst. How violent, how unfair, how unjust, how driven and manipulated we all can be in a multitude. Yesterday we were watching, my wife and myself, a documentary on the places in Jerusalem where the final hours of Jesus happened. And she asked me, did the multitude really ask Jesus to be crucified? I don't understand. What happened? Don't fool yourself. You can be easily manipulated. Either by that 4-minute specialist YouTube that you watch, or that message or text that you receive, or by someone right here with a tie hanging in his neck. Sin's ugly face of violence and abuse was completely exposed, and this is justice. But then, the ultimate consequence of eternal death was completely paid by God himself. The ultimate price, and let me ask you something. Considering life as God has gifted us with, has anyone in Earth's history ever died? Well, physically they have, right? Not theologically. I'll explain myself. No one has died the eternal death, according to the Bible. No one has died the second death. No one. Everyone, every single person that has passed will come back to life. Every single person. But Jesus, he died the second death. He died the price. He paid for the price of eternal sin. And that's mercy. Can you see that at the cross, sin was not rationalized? It was not the fluffy, woofy kind of love that you hear about. God's love is a God of sacrifice and restoration. Sacrifice and restoration. Very good. You got the point. The love of Jesus, living the love of Jesus, should be the perfect expression of God's character. And let me ask you this now. You are responsible for choosing the last message that I should preach, or yourself. It's your last message. to the world, what should that message look like? And as a preacher, you hear every now and then some great counsel and feedback, and they're always welcome about the preaching, about the direction, about some commentary that was some comment that was made or anything. It's always great feedback, either by example or by contrast. But it's always good feedback. But the point is, if you had a last message to share, what would that look like? Your last message to the people that you love, to the most important people of your life. It's your last message for them. What would that look like? Don't come with those generic kind of expressions, okay? Let's apply it now as a church collectively. So, what would you consider to be your last message? Not in general terms. I'm not talking about, okay, you just have to share with them the three angels' messages of Revelation 14. I want to know what would be your emphasis. I want to know what would be your sentiment. I want to know how you would convey that last message. That's my question, because we learned in the last episode that all of the doctrines that we believe will be judged by the people that we are. Remember that? Keep that in mind. All of the doctrines, all of the beautiful systematic organization that we have about what we believe in the Bible, all of that will be judged by who I am. By the power, the effect, and the power of the gospel in my life. So what will be your last message? And here's the danger of it all. Certainly, you can theologically butcher the text with your own preconceived ideas of righteousness that has nothing of the by faith. You want an example? Go to Revelation chapter 14. If you look at the three angels' messages, and you're anxious about getting to the part of fear God and give Him glory, you missed on the entire framework of the passage. It's so easy for us to butcher the entire purpose, sentiment, and method of what is being taught to us here. The message, the three angels' messages of Revelation 14, don't start with fear God. It starts with the everlasting gospel. That's what frames the entire fear God. Because when it gets down, when the rubber meets the road, here's the question. Obedience. Are you willing to obey someone you don't trust, you don't love? And here's the point. Sophia, right? Sophia. You love mom, right? You love her, right? If mom asks you not to open the door, will you obey her? If she asks you, in a scenario, don't open that door, will you obey her? Don't think too much. Come on. Here's the point about obedience. And don't ever forget this, okay? Here's the point about obedience. Obedience is all about trust. It's all about trust. And how can you trust someone you don't know well, accurately? What is the picture of God that you have in your mind? Daddy, why do we come here? Daddy, why are we coming here? And you can go down to chapter 14 and get all of the very important details. You can get to the mark of the beast and all of those details, but you can miss on that first framework of the everlasting gospel when you get to chapter 14, verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God, obedience, right? But this is not the only information. The information is that there is a group of commandment-keeping people who have the faith of Jesus. It's not every or any commandment-keeping people. It's a commandment-keeping people that is Christ-centered in their obedience. It's all about Jesus. It's all about your relationship with Him. And I love Him. I trust Him because I know that the power of the gospel, the power of God, is service, is incarnation and service. What will be your last message? Ellen Wright wrote this: the last message of mercy to be given to the world is a revelation of what? Of God's character of love. Am I doing this in my life? If people look at me, at what I say, and how I proceed, are people understanding a little bit better about who God is? That God is not a manipulative, all-powerful being in heaven, but someone who empties himself. And that all of the power of the universe, He makes it available to you, to serve you. Is this the kind of person I'm becoming? It's more about Him, less about me. The children of God are to manifest His glory. In their own life and character, they are to reveal what the grace of God has done for them, what the grace of God has done for you. Because what God has done for you, your relationship with Him, should transpire. Who He is for you is your message. Well, if obedience is about trust, and if our mission as a church is to represent God's perfect character of love, that power of God revealed in the gospel, if that's our mission, if that's our plan, if that's what it means to live the love of Jesus, to reveal the power of God in the gospel in my life, if that's the plan, obedience rests as a basis connected to trust. No wonder we talk about this so often. And you might have heard this quote so many times. Someone wrote 130 years ago, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. Christ's method alone. So the Savior mingled, desired their good, showed His sympathy, ministered to their needs. And here's the point for us today. He won their confidence. Once again, it's all about trust. Can people trust you in what you're saying and what you're representing? So, to wrap up, basic principles for us to live as a church that reveals the power of the gospel in a very practical way. Number one, our call to action is to live in meaningful community. And by meaningful community, I mean a church that is more than just a Sabbath club. People actually care for each other, pray for each other, they get together, and they live life throughout the week by sharing it. Obviously, it is very hard to have that kind of relationship with 200, 300, 400 people. Jesus, God incarnate, He chose a plan that usually works. He had His 12. Jesus operated His ministry and lived life in a small group. That creates meaningful community. We'll explore that further on down our series. Number two, active discipleship. I don't know if you noticed that, but from philosopher, theologian, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, Paul was kind of into sports, man. right? I don't know if he was really into it, but all of the metaphors that he uses about the Christian experience and the run, maybe it was like liners and small talk with the soldiers, but he knew what he was talking about. And now this weekend that we just got started with Winter Olympics, right? So he was something about sports. And here's the fact about all of those metaphors. When Paul is talking about our Christian life, living the love of Jesus, it's all about the process. It's all about the journey. And you're going to fall. And it's going to hurt. And you're going to have those guys grabbing you, and we'll keep journeying on. We'll keep moving forward. I don't look what's behind anymore. I keep on looking forward. 3, authentic worship. Authentic worship is something that transcends the tired worship war debates. I've even heard before many times that ironic liner that with the worship wars, Celebration Church, remember 80s, 90s, you remember all that mess if you guys were part of the Christian community and Adventist community especially especially 90s when we got the celebration situation and the worship wars going on. And I remember that one ironic one-liner. We held strong, and we, the church, kept our hymnals. Yep. And we learned and we lost our youth. It's not about that. It's not about me. Worship is about God. It's about Him being worshiped in a language that I can understand. Because the principle of incarnation is a manifestation of the power of God through the gospel. Remember that God's modus operandi is incarnation, okay? If God wants to know who that person is, He will become one like Him. Incarnation. Worship should lead us to empty ourselves from whatever is in there and to be filled by God's presence according to His power to change us, but in a language and culturally adequate to what we're doing. Today, 4th, outward focus. Please don't forget the beautiful and impactful message that we just learned from Paul, from the abstract of his thesis in Romans. The power of God is revealed in the gospel. And the God that we love is a humble and other-centered God. That's the God that I love, that I learned to love. He's humble. He's humble. He empties Himself. He has all of the power in the universe, and He empties Himself to serve. He becomes like we are, so we can become who He is. Outward focus. If we are to emulate, to repeat, to imitate, and reveal God's character, we should not be all about ourselves. We should be all about the one that's lost. Outwardly focused. And lastly, but most importantly, Jesus-centered outreach. Everything is about Jesus. Everything should be about Jesus. He is the center of the Bible story that we tell, and He should be the center of the life that we live. And if you really ask people who aren't here today, people who used to attend and are not attending anymore, if you really ask them, in what deal or ideal circumstance they would come, most certainly no one would mention a super cool stage, a lit band, or a pastor in skinny jeans. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. This is not what they're looking for. This is not what I'm looking for as well. No one would ask for a giant budget or for watered down gospel or for a copy and paste of a popular Christian music ministry. All the things that we normally associate with a growing church are not really what people are looking for. Instead, they are searching for something infinitely more profound and totally free of charge. They are searching for a clear revelation of God's character. In you, for you, and through you. They are searching for Jesus. And we have the privilege and mission to turn tangible and invisible God that we love and worship. We have the privilege of live the life, the love of Jesus.